We are live. We are live. We have a quorum. And we are going back to 8454, the Education Transformation Bill. And we're going to talk today about property valuation. I've got Rebecca first, but whatever you and Jake have worked out
together.
Yeah. Your show. Not sure if it's a dog and phone show. I thought that always came out as vaudeville or something, but
Who's the phone?
it may be risky.
Well, thank you for having us. Jake Feldman.
Thank you for putting up with our crazy schedule.
Our pleasure. So Jake Feldman, Senior Fiscal Analyst at the Tax Department.
And I'm Deputy Commissioner Rebecca Tamara, Tax Department.
There's a lot of tax related stuff in each 454, but we're just going to talk about the property valuation and tax classification and stuff today.
Okay.
And we can come back on homestead exemption. We can come back on whatever
I
else.
think we're chunking it out next week. So we've got the homestead exemption. We've got the reappraisal proposal. We've got a couple out there, and then transition, which seems to be a large foggy space between now, the present state, and the future state. So we're going to see if we can cut through some of the fog.
Great. We are going to have a quick kind of plain English discussion of the reappraisal sections and classification sections, which Rebecca.
Yeah, I can do a quick overview for those. That stuff out. Well, I'll just say high level that we are comfortable with where the reappraisal pieces landed in H454. Just to do some context setting, this is kind of like the next step. This bill kind of contemplates the next step towards regionalizing the reappraisal system, which was started in Act 68 of 2023. Just for background, that's where the legislature created a 6-year reappraisal cycle to replace the reappraisal orders that are based on your CLA.
Yeah.
Level. In addition to that, this H454 is passed into the House, creates reappraisal assessment districts or RADs, and bring those into being in January of 2030. In this bill, the RADs align with county lines, but Franklin and Grand Isle and Essex and Orleans are combined into one RAD each, so 12 total. It also mandates that all municipalities within a RAD reappraise on the 6-year cycle under one reappraisal contract. So that's kind of like the towards regionalization that are in this bill. And then importantly, leaves a lot of the other details for the department to work out in the off season with a stakeholder working group. And that was really important to us to have that pause and kind of work with the folks who are actually like doing the reappraisal work and reappraisal contracting today on the ground, because while TVR is really, I think the most expert of any state, agency in this space, we're not the ones that do the actual work. That's, municipal. So we're that working group will be addressing some of like the big questions, like who's going to be holding the reappraisal contracts in this regional model, what authorities are managing appeals, and this group or another group will be looking at statutory amendments related to moving the grand list assessment date from April 1st to January 1st, and also addressing kind of like the funding implications of some of the other decisions that are made in the group.
I think we will have a better sense after we hear from members of the public on this. But when I first heard it, it talked about all the communities in the county will get together and decide our track record on that is not always stellar. And this does involve money and grand list, and there's power giving up going on, and yeah, I think I feel more comfortable if there is a backstop there, lest we hit a stone wall.
Yeah, I would say that the way that H 454 kind of navigates that backstop is by requiring that the municipalities within a RAD are all reappraising under one single contract. You know, it doesn't go as far as saying like, does the state hold the contract with the reappraisal
Yeah.
firm, or is it like, you know, a cooperative effort of the
But they have all
municipalities contained?
agreed.
Yeah, yeah. So I think those are kind of like, that puts some teeth into like, you know, what world this working group is now aiming towards. I don't think it would work for, you know, this group to come back with a plan where municipalities are still doing this one-on-one.
Oh, well, they can't get the appraisals, and that's setting the CLA, which is setting the tax rates, setting it, it's just not working.
How many RADs are there now?
Well, yeah.
12 in the bill.
In the-
You know, maybe it's obvious to the committee that, you know, the rate of reappraisal in Vermont right now is too slow. It's, you know, it's beyond 10 years on average. And so there was a bill passed that said you need to do it every 6 years. So the question to us in our original study on Act 68 was how can we make that happen? And so naturally, you need some efficiency, and so you would need towns that are next to each other doing it at the same time. So one firm could handle all those towns. So that's the impetus here.
Thanks. Yeah.
What we're working towards.
Also laid out in this bill are some important transition dates, just to help municipalities navigate like this kind of long phase of moving from individual municipal contracts with reappraisal firms to a regional reappraisal system. So this is like kind of weedy, but there's language in this bill that stops PBR from issuing new individual municipal reappraisal orders in 2027. If you're a municipality that has like an outstanding reappraisal order and you haven't been able to get a contract in place yet by contracted for 2030 or before, the reappraisal order is no longer binding for you. And it also prohibits municipalities from entering into any new reappraisal contract as individual towns after January 2027.
But someplace like this city of Burlington, which has probably more properties than Essex County. Are they going to, is it good? It's all of Chittenden County?
Yeah, H 454 treats all municipalities the same, but you know, the good thing to point out, which will be coming up in our work. So just similarly, I'll just do a really quick run through of what H 454 does in the area of classifications, and then Jake's slides are way more exciting than that. So I'm really warming up for the big chat. So as folks are aware, effective January of 2029, there are new property classifications contemplated in this bill. Sorry. All my friends that once. So there's 4 classifications, whereas under current law, there are 2, homestead and non-homestead. It requires these classifications to be based on the present day or intended use for the upcoming year. And it sets a statewide education tax rate to be multiplied by a factor for each of these new classifications. In the bill, all the factors are set at 1, so it's still just, you know, one education tax rate, but
The non-homestead apartment include non-homestead houses that are rented long-term?
as drafted, yes.
Okay. Okay. That might be determined of. Yeah. So. Where do short-term rentals go? Non-homestead residential. So.
Is it? Wouldn't it?
That's strange, because,
But if you have an ADU, that's.
well, they used to have like 9, 6, they had.
In earlier
a lot
iterations of the bill,
more,
yeah.
And it got cut back. So we will look at those, and we are getting testimony on those, but some of them do not seem self-explanatory. We may have to have A, B, C, and D underneath, so you
Yeah.
can, you see where short-term rentals do fit in.
And anything you want to say on this now or wait till?
I think we're gonna talk about.
Well, good.
Okay,
In the bill, there are responsibilities for the tax department and town officials coming up. Action required by the department, first and foremost, is to study how to implement the classifications and how to identify second homes. And that report back is as drafted December of 2026. We're also tasked with amending and creating forms as needed for property owners to report their property uses for calendar year 2028. And then we're tasked with assigning classification to every grand list parcel, which shall be carried with the fiscal office by December of 2028. And then from that point on, listers and assessors are required to classify each parcel of real estate by June 1 annually, partially relying on department information. And like Tom said,
I guess if this stays the course, but if we comply with the governor's requirement that we put things into action more quickly than the House bill proposes, then I'm assuming some of these dates might have.
yeah, our thinking is aligned there for sure. And I just I want to highlight that implementation study because, a lot of our interest in getting more engagement on the classification side from the Senate. This side of that, this body continues to go in that direction, is that we would just like to have as much clarity as possible going into that report back, so we can, do our best in addressing situations, because how to define these categories is really, I think something that should be left for policymakers here, and just, would not be my preference to have the tax department making administrative
We should take
decisions.
the.
Yeah, well, yeah, sure.
Yes,
So do you, just for our own edification as we move forward, do you like this timeline? Do you think you can work with this timeline, and does it sound feasible? And
Well, I think that the administration's timeline, preferred timeline would be much faster than what's contemplated in the House. So as you previewed, Chair Cummings, I think we would want to be giving whatever information legislators need at a quicker clip if the Senate's going to be more aligned with
but
it.
can you do that?
yeah, I guess I.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
you can do that, all right. Because it's not very good use of time if we require you to do things that would mean you couldn't send out my tax return.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Actually,
Thank you.
but, yeah, okay.
Okay, so we do have some pretty major recommendations on the bill. We like the RADs. They were our idea.
Okay.
The stakeholder working group is important. We kind of fleshed that out in the House, but we need that to kind of work out some of these details. So we're pretty good in that area. This has come up a bunch. It seems like the RADs really should be the same boundaries as the future school districts for a variety of reasons. Some of them related to just simplification. And to be clear, like what Vermont is attempting here is sort of a recreation of the county system that exists in every state. So we're creating RADs, we're creating school districts, and every other state does this by county.
And you should, yeah, it would be really awkward if half your school district got reappraised and the other half didn't, or just 3 towns didn't get reappraised.
I think VALA and VLCT feels the same way on that.
Okay, yeah,
So that means if you're forming school districts, then the RADs would fall.
okay,
So we might know what those school districts are as early as next year. We might not know what they are until FY30.
I would prefer the former.
Yeah. So that's all just a comment, maybe a comment, it's like, we don't, yeah, at 26, that makes it a lot easier, right, but. So I don't know, that doesn't happen till FY30, does that screw up your whole?
Oh, then the property tax paying is gonna get so bad if we don't do something to.
No, I know,
36.
but, yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
that would make life harder.
okay.
We're
Um,
gonna have to bite the bullet eventually.
This is a.
we're recommending that you strike the non-homestead apartment classification, and we're gonna explain why we think that. And we're also gonna talk about just that creating any additional classification is a massive administrative undertaking. So, the apartment one, we're gonna talk about why you might wanna strike that entirely. We've talked about second homes, in this committee and other committees so many times. It is a really, really hard nut to crack. And anytime there's a tax policy that another state is not doing, that makes life super hard. The only second homes tax that we're aware of is in 2 counties in Hawaii. And we know how they do it. It's on the architecture of a very different zoning system. We were in communication with Hawaii about what they do, and how they do it, and they want the part of exempting second homes that are rented out long-term has been an administrative challenge for them. But anyway, it's very difficult. So the definition, is quite important. And if you want us to write a report about how to identify them, then solidifying that definition as much as possible will be helpful.
Okay. And that's one the House decided not to do, or they kicked the can down the staircase to us.
There's a definition.
There is a
Yeah.
definition.
It's not,
Alright.
just not specific enough.
It is a lot of challenges with it, and like,
I remember you showed us.
yeah, and we'll look at it. It's similar to the one that was used on the property transfer tax surcharge. And that has been a challenge. We'll talk about why.
Okay,
If the Senate is contemplating an FY28 start date to a new FAFT funding system, then, and if the Senate would like to know if a second homes tax could be a part of that funding system as a revenue stream, then we would recommend moving the report up to December of this year. You would need to know that information. This is not to say that the report is going to tell you how to crack the nut. This is to say, like, the report will tell you this is a viable potential revenue source for your new funding system. So if you want to do, if that's the timeline you're on, then we would recommend December of this year, not 2026.
Can you remind me again what that 61B report, that's just on second homes text?
It's like,
Like surcharge?
it's how do you identify them, basically.
Just. Like if you have a second home, somebody buys another house, whether it's in state or out of state owner. Couldn't you just lease that property annually for $1 to a family member and it's a long-term lease? Because a long-term lease doesn't dictate that has to be your permanent residence.
Potentially, I mean, if you were really somebody with resources and you bought, a very valuable house in Stowe, for example, maybe you could even set up some entity that rents it back to yourself.
Right.
So that's something to think about.
And you wouldn't be able to, like from the tax department, you wouldn't be able to dictate how somebody, like, is that a legit lease to somebody? I wouldn't think.
That's one of the many administrative challenges.
And I know we talked about at one point in this committee that was occupied less than 6 months, which is a non-resident.
But you don't have
And
to have.
it was who goes out and checks and sees if who's there for 6 months. or who's there for 5 months. Does the town clerks want to, are we supposed to go drive by and see if the lights are on, or you can put a light on a timer? So how do we know? And a car can be in a garage and
There's a few variables.
a few variables, and it gets down, does 454, it's an attestation? Is this one that,
The log, we're gonna show that, but the logic on the second homes is kind of like a default. Like if you have a residential property fit for year-round habitation and there's no homestead declaration on it and no landlord certificate on it, then it must be a second.
second home? And if you get that tax bill, you'll probably, if it's not a second home, get your homestead declaration in.
Yeah, that's a concern.
Yeah.
Like, you know, there are homestead declaration process is tied to income tax filing, right?
Right.
And of course, you don't need to file income taxes and file a homestead declaration, but that's the way it is. And there are a lot of people who aren't required to file income taxes because their income is low enough.
Right.
And so if they, you know, didn't file income taxes and they also didn't file their homestead declaration, the state could identify their property as a second home and they get hit with some sort of a surcharge.
Surcharge. Okay, but that would. We could do a warning like they are for that licenses, the smart license. You may not be able to get on your airplane if you don't
Yeah, they would need. to
get
do
your
something
real ID.
like that.
Yeah, but it would take something like that. Since there aren't, people don't watch TV news or radio, or it's a little more challenging to communicate, to know where people are likely to see it, so. All right,
We're our policy analyst is tracking technical edits on the bill and we have them to share when the time is right.
okay,
Okay, so here's why we recommend striking the non-homestead apartment classification. It would be hyper complicated to administer, and if it would cost the education fund if you had a lower rate for apartments. Right now, apartments are just in with the non-homestead, so if you had something lower, that would be lost revenue to the ed fund. If the policy goal of this is to make renting more affordable, we would recommend that the legislature consider expanding the renter credit, which is a successful program that is paid out of the general fund, not the ed fund. If the policy goal is to encourage the construction of apartments, we would ask you to consider leveraging the existing programs that promote housing construction. I think there's quite a few of them that are, you know, existing or being contemplated. If the policy goal is to encourage landlords to rent out their units long-term rather than Airbnb, consider monitoring the impact of the new short-term rental surcharge, which started in August, which raises money for the ed fund.
that was the rooms and meals, right?
Yeah, it's a 3% surcharge
Yeah.
just on short-term rentals.
So we did that last year to buy down the tax rate off. Okay,
What if it's all free?
Pardon?
I said, what if it's all free? Because I think it kind of is. I mean, I think there are multiple reasons why we do that.
I mean, this gets complicated and it's enforcement, I don't. Well, you said Hawaii has done second home tax. Other states have done proximity to something. There's view taxes, or I think on Cape Cod, if you were on the water, there was a surcharge, and if you could see it, smell it, hear it, but And I think Colorado has a couple counties or something like its proximity to the ski slopes. There's some fee, but nobody has just, except Hawaii, which is an island and very different. They're also the only one that's what is it? It's a tax you looked into. And because there's nothing that goes, you can't just get in your car and drive it from the border. Okay,
So, it's to Senator Gulick's comment about, what if it's all three, right? So what if you're creating a new classification to address all three of those things? Well, creating a new classification is super hard. We have two of them right now, homestead and non-homestead. We're going to talk about how we pull that off. But the key pieces are you need a definition. If it's based on ownership, is it based on ownership? The homestead is, and is it based on how the property could be used or how the property is being used? In the H 454, it's about how it is being used. And important to note that the use of a property can and does change over time. So you need an annual reevaluation of how it's being used. The second and very important component is identification. How are properties in the class identified through self-attestation made by the owner or through the determination of the taxing jurisdiction? H 454 is the, for second homes, it's the latter. It's the taxing jurisdiction would kind of use the logic to bucket or to identify the second homes. And then the other thing is that you just walking through downtown Montpelier, it should be obvious that properties can have mixed uses. You can have a bike shop on the first floor, a long-term apartment on the second floor, and an Airbnb on the third floor. So you have to have, if you're going to do this fairly, you need to accommodate mixed uses. We do that in our current system. We're pretty familiar with the homestead declaration, and that's how we identify homesteads. We have a strong definition that exists that has a huge amount of statute and also tax department guidance on that. It said dwelling surrounding land owned and occupied as the owner's domicile. Everything else is default. It's like if you're not a homestead, then if the property's not a homestead, it's not a homestead. So it's kind of the catch-all. The way to identify homesteads is that declaration, which is a type of self-attestation. And in the case of mixed use, we handle that. The portion of property that's not being used as the owner's residence is taxed at the non-homestead rate. So a homestead property can definitely have a non-homestead component. If part of the property will be used as a business or rental, it will be taxed as non-homestead. And if you take a look at your own homestead declarations, there are these few lines that handle that. So tax department gets that information on the homestead declaration and then hands it back to all the towns so that they can move that portion of the property into the non-homestead classification and tax it that way. So we have a way to handle mixed use. I have two little overlapping Venn diagram bubbles, but if there's a third one or a fourth one, you can kind of imagine that you would need to accommodate the overlap of the bubbles. Here's the definition from H 454 of non-homestead residential, which is like second homes and potentially short-term rentals. It's a parcel or portion of a parcel with one or more dwelling units habitable on a year-round basis. This habitable on a year-round basis was part of the surcharge last year that was passed, and it is tricky, as you can maybe imagine. Like, what makes a property habitable on a year-round basis? Is it insulation? Is it heating? Is it, a plumbing? Is it a road that's plowed? My wife would call our house not habitable on a year-round basis. Sorry, that's an issue. But it's very subjective. And so that has, we can come in and talk about some of the challenges that we encountered with the transfer tax, but that's only a couple thousand properties. And so this would be much more widespread. For Richard Homestead, yeah, so I'm sorry.
I'm just trying to think of this through somebody that was not trying to follow along. Somebody, when would this non-home, would it just be done in filing? Non-homestead, does, like we do now, homestead declaration and filing?
As the bill contemplates, it's like the town is sitting on some information,
Yeah,
about, year-round dwellings in the town. Tax department sends homestead declarations and landlord certificates, and if none of those paying, then it's a second home.
okay, so if I own a property and I said, in February, March, when I turn in my income taxes and I mean, could somebody like say, yeah, I'm a homestead, I plan on renting this thing for 6 months a year, but then, didn't end up happening. I mean, could somebody just keep doing that over and over again?
Yeah, I mean, you could file a landlord certificate, say, like, oh yeah, this year I'm gonna rent out my.
But then it just doesn't happen.
Right, and so then that would put some pressure, I think, on the tax department to try to track that down.
Yeah, to find out if it was nefarious or.
Yeah, we actually do some discovery on homestead, non-homestead right now.
Yeah.
To try to follow up on those.
I was gonna say, we're in a similar position when I lived in Florida 6 months and 3 days. And I lived here 5 months and 25 days. Oh, craps. It's, in some ways, it is the honor system, and the penalty or is the possibility that you will get audited, that your neighbor will call the town clerk and say, they've been here, the car was in the yard, and they've been here 9 months this year. But how your neighbor would know that you weren't paying taxes in Vermont, I don't know, but
Yeah.
that is in many ways on the honor system. And a lot of people go to Florida from the winter here. Yes. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, I missed the beginning of your report. I have a question back on your summary of recommendations.
Sure.
You say move section 61B to the relevant Senate timeline. I don't know what you're talking about, what the Senate timeline is. We haven't passed a bill yet. So you're making assumptions about what might be coming out of the Senate.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a technical concept. There is like, whatever, if the Senate is contemplating a new funding system for FY28, and we don't know what the fiscal year you're thinking of is, but then, and if the Senate wanted to potentially include second homes as a revenue source, then that's why we're saying bump that report up to see if it's feasible.
I think you shouldn't get ahead of yourself, Jake, and assume what the Senate is doing.
Well, I think part of what
I
we're
have
trying
more
to do,
questions.
if you weren't here, the question I asked was if, because we're all trying to avoid a veto and being here in July, if we move closer to the governor's timeline, which is the one thing we know he's not happy with in this bill, wouldn't we have to move up some of those dates? And the answer was yes.
That's fair, but there's no Senate timeline.
No,
right
there
now,
is
so
no Senate
I feel like
timeline
they're
at
getting
this
ahead of
point.
themselves. Okay, so I'm confused as to why you're you seem to be okay with the sort of non-homestead residential second home classification, but not the apartment classification, the rental classification, and I'm wondering what is what makes one more complicated than the other? Could you explain that?
I think that they're equally complicated. The thing that maybe makes there's some policy things that we pointed out maybe before you came in about why the rental.
Yeah, I was looking at your slide. I caught the tail end of that.
Okay. They're both hyper complicated. The rental units, like potentially many more of them, and also more interspersed with different property configurations. The second homes, maybe it's easier to isolate. But on the rents, do you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, well, I want to clarify that I don't think we're making advocating for a second homes rate by any means. I think we have a really long track record in many committees in this body that, we think this is a pretty complex direction to go, but we have been charged to take a report on it. And if we don't have clear legislative intent about what we're supposed to be identifying in that report, it's going to be a lot harder for us to bring back something valuable or relevant. And also, we pay a lot of attention to what's going on in these committees, and it's a perennial issue, and it's an issue that's on a lot of legislators' minds. So, for better or worse, I think we're going to keep engaging on that one.
Okay, so it's fair to say that you think they're both complicated, but you're more willing to work on trying to make the second homes one work than the rental one, just because you feel like you've heard that's more of a priority.
It's called out in H454 as something that we need to report back on. So we need more information before we can report back on it.
It's 4:30, so I wanna finish it.
Okay. So the other highlighted piece of the definition is that a landlord would need to do a prospective type of declaration about what they're going to do with their units. Right now, the landlord certificate is about what they did in a prior calendar year, and that it's just so we can administer the rent credit. This would be different. It would be looking forward and saying, I'm, attesting that I'm going to rent this for more than 6 months of the year, and they would kind of have to do some kind of identification of portion of property that is going to be rented. Okay, so we have some prior stuff from us on this, an Act 73 report, and we talked about property classification in the Act 68 report. And if anyone is curious about what other states do in this space, check out Lincoln Institute has a really good database that you can kind of customize to get at what you want, to see what other states are doing. Most states just have one tax specification. Some, like Vermont, have 2, and then some have more. Like Hawaii has a whole bunch, and some other states have more. But it's a good resource for anyone who's curious.
Okay. Any other questions? So we're gonna have to do a deeper dive into all of these. Probably we've got apartments, which you said included it's what do we do with second homes? How do we define that? What happens if they rent that for 4 months in the summer? And then the owner just is here in the winter, or
Yeah, there's a lot of complexity.
and apartments. There's some high-end apartments, regular rental, residential, and then there's subsidized apartments that we're building like crazy. And we found out last year they can't raise their rent because their rent is paid to a percentage of the income of the residents who are by definition, can't afford market rate rent, so what do we do with those units? And I doubt, are they eligible for, they are,
Yeah, the renters are eligible for rental credit and the properties get a 10% exemption on the property value, but the issue last year was that everybody's property tax rates were going up so much.
Yeah.
That even with the 10% exemption, they were concerned, just like everybody was. And so, yeah, they, you know, they would, that's a group that, you know, would, you know, be impacted.
yeah, and there's a proposal came from the House that we raise the non-residential, or, yeah, the non-homestead rate, the old system, in order to raise some money to keep income sensitivity, you know, because it's got the year lag in order to pay that to bring it up. And that's we've really heard from the low, from the subsidized units that can't do that. I mean, we just have no way to raise the money. So we have a problem with these. Right now, there is no money raised from changing these classifications. Some, and I don't know if we can figure out who, because it depends on towns. In some towns, the non-residential, when we said them, the non-residential was higher, the non-homestead was higher than the homestead. But we knew, I think it's because of the rate of increased school spending, that at some point in the future, they'll cross. I know they crossed in Plainfield about 15 years ago. I know if they've crossed in Stowe. How many towns they've crossed in, I don't know. But depending on where they sit, there's going to be some winners and losers in there. We tax them all the same. And so there'll be some happy or unhappy people, depending on what. And I suppose if we're doing a statewide property tax, or have you calculated that? If we do a foundation formula and we do it on a state grand list, and we'll go with the house's foundation number, I assume you can calculate the property tax rate?
We've been plugging away at that kind of thing for many months.
I mean, that would be something to know, because then we know what we're looking at in tax bills.
Mhm.
And is it higher? Is it lower? In how many pounds is it higher and lower? So you can do that would be.
Julia has that.
Julia has that. Okay, why am I not so good? Okay, so that's for Julia. All right, other questions for the tax department?
Well, thanks so much. And
You
know,
are not seeing it, we're making it know.
yeah,
I feel like everybody's so sad when I come in and talk about a second homes.
We just think it's easy, and you keep telling us it's just not easy.
If another state had some statute, we can, you know, lift it and talk to them about how it's going.
How about other countries? Are there any models outside of our country that we could look at?
Yeah, France has something interesting that's based on like the furnishings and the comforts of the homes. Vancouver has something, it's the only one.
and that's like a proxy for vacancy, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
actually for vacancy.
Some uncomfortable stools. Look through the window. Taxes are going way up.
I did tax appeals The first year we used CapTap in the city of Montpelier.
That's a term I haven't heard for a while.
We found all the bugs. There were 300. I've never heard so many people badmouth the quality of their wallpaper. Say, we don't care. Do you have walls? I never saw an inferior or a superior bathroom. I'm assuming below average is an outhouse. And above average must be a spa, but everything I saw, and it was a wide range, was average. You got 3 fixtures, you're average. But it was interesting to hear people describe their home to you. Well, that's what they were getting taxed on. Okay. All right,
Thank you.
thank you.
I think random tax rules is the answer.
You wanna still do that?
I think of the way for that one.
Still live? Or?
We are live.
Okay, I want the random.
We are here today. We're trying to get some big chunks for next week. I've asked joint fiscal to come over someday next week. We're still checking out the schedules. Talk to us about the unknowns. Things we don't know. Things we know. One of the things we don't know is the districts, and we won't know that when we come home unless something changes radically. And so we will, once districts are done, I think I'm working on the assumption, I think we talked about this yesterday, that we're gonna have something like the SBA fewer than how many do we have now? 200 and 300 and some.
119.
119,
Districts.
but yeah, fewer than 119, but more than 9. But somewhere in that range, once we see what we decide on the districts, we will have to
Yep.
jiggle
Hey,
things.
why don't we just have a lottery?
Well, we could do
We
that.
can make a decision and move on, and whatever we do is gonna be somewhat wrong anyway.
Guys, come on.
And you know, people will, and not everybody will be happy, but
We'll argue about it for a year with massive
no,
committee, and
this
we'll
is
come up with
a good
something that
discussion.
half the people won't like, and we'll change it 2 years later.
Randy, we're dealing with the lives of future Vermonters and future Americans. It's important stuff. And to be
Yes.
trivial about it is not helpful.
Yeah.
Well, it's not, but the net effect is, we're gonna kill it by, in fact, micromanaging it through committee. And we're still not gonna come up with anything that's perfect, because nothing is perfect.
Nothing is gonna be perfect, I agree, but there are, there's better and worse.
And we will try and find the best we can with what we know now. That's all we can do. And there will be compromises because we will not all agree on what is best. Politics is the art of the possible.
Yeah.
And we will do what we possibly can to the best of our ability, which future generations will disagree with. But when the tax bills come out, we may find there's a different set of people with concerns. We are trying, anyone know we can save $220 million by July 1st?
Wait, you added,
In healthcare.
you added an extra 20. It was 200 million 2 days ago.
Oh, it's 200.
Don't add
All right,
another
it's
20.
200.
It's
It's
200 is enough.
Administrative costs. Yes, savings.
Interest
Or
rates.
we're trying to keep our insurance company alive, and
What's a check?
we're hopeful that we're gonna be able to achieve that and avoid another major rate increase. This again is small, deny, and suddenly there's a major issue with not enough reserves.
Do you see any issue with retaining the number 2 insurance company?
We've been told that if we lose number 1, number 2 will be gone.
you know.
isn't in a position to take over, so. No, we will do what we can do. But I'm hopeful we can do that and avoid another big expense this year. Something, but hopefully nothing like last year. Hopefully, and, we will muddle our way through this.
I chuckled at Senator Brock's lottery thing, one, because I think it was meant in jest, and two, because I know you want it simple, but I mean, we can't get that simple. There's gotta be some complexity, and I agree, this is a very important thing, this, how we educate our kids, so I don't mean to make light of it, these are just long days, but.
I do have a good sense of humor, honestly. And you don't have a good sense of humor and
It just hasn't been
I don't know,
enough
this
people
is-
in
this
this
is
building.
a
this
big
year.
deal.
Well, I mean, really, the way we educate our kids is what goes on in the classroom. And we're trying to take some of the pressure off of there. And if the Department of Education can come up with the kind of supports they're talking about, it will be better. I think the question, they are using theoretical model. The question is, can we take that theoretical model and put it into the geographical reality and the population of reality in Vermont and make it work? And it's going to take everybody trusting everybody's good faith. And and we probably won't get it completely right the first time. But I am trying to get some hard numbers from the administration on the final state. You know,
Future state, the future state or?
future
final
state, final
Future
state,
Okay,
Star
Make sure
Star
you're doing
Wars.
okay.
But because I am very leery of telling people that the property taxes are going to go down a whole lot. Because we've got several years of transition in which
Mhm.
we could lose any number of federal money.
And transition.
I don't think
And
we should, I don't
transition.
think we should be telling them that. I think that's, I don't think that's.
I think we should.
It's real truth, tell them the truth.
We're
Tell
changing
them
the
the truth.
spending
yeah.
trajectory.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We're changing the spending trajectory. I think that's.
I think that's,
Yeah.
yes, I think that we will get more control. And our goal is that your kids will get a better education.
And the issue throughout all of this is measurement and accountability. And it's quick. It's something, it's
Yeah.
not something that you put off for 5 years to go look back. You've got to do it as you go.
And
Because that way you will find the mistakes that you're making as you go.
I think we need to make sure that there is a measure. The complaint I'm getting, my source in the school board, is they don't know for a year what their test scores were. And we changed the Vermont test twice.
Hmm.
So they don't know how their kids are doing, and they don't know for a year, which is another, it's just this huge delay before you can try and.
Are there already indicators, for example,
Yeah.
like student behavior issues and other kinds of things that may give you a clue if you're going in the right
They
direction?
track those on almost daily basis.
Yeah, graduation rates.
Graduation rate
Stuff that's internal.
Yeah.
and continuation rate, that's where we're.
But it's no one thing, it's a series of things that give you a picture, hopefully.
Yeah, to your point though, about the testing, we need to be able to get long range data and then you change the standardized test every 5-6 years. It's really hard to put
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
And that's.
Well, it looks bad, but it really isn't bad because we really changed the test, so now, but
You change the goalpost.
Well, the best thing we have, and we don't measure until they're done. It's.
Yeah. It's the continuation rate. How many of our kids
Yeah. that's
go
not-
on to anything? We're not talking college here, we're talking HVAC training,
Yeah, why not school?
apprenticeship.
But there's a concrete metric that is quite alarming in Vermont. It came up in economic development. If you look at our high school graduation rate, from 2017 until this year, we were
It
stuck
was
with the
what-
nation.
When I was down there,
90%.
yeah, we
Since
were,
2017, there was a very steady trend of
Ooh.
pre-pandemic, and we're down to 82%. So we dropped 8 percentage points. That's a lot of
82?
from 90 to 82. We used to be top of the nation. I'm saying we're doing a lot of great things in this state with education, but when kids aren't completing their degrees, that's concerning.
from high
That's a lot.
school, that is more than concerning, that
I
I
will,
didn't know.
I will outline that, I work in a high school. That, it's the same reason why schools are struggling to put athletic teams on the field is with what's happened with wages in the workforce. High school kids, they can get out when they're 16 years old, and if they want to work hard, they can make a living. And you're seeing a lot of that. Kids are like, I can 20
Yeah.
$20 an hour. And they'll, you see them, they'll be gone for a day, gone for 2 days, and they'll come back, what you do? I was putting out concrete. I mean, because they're making $25 an hour of food out of concrete. And that really is a big
We
piece of it.
Have enough 30-year-olds to pour.
Right, they're not going out for athletics, why
Yeah.
not? Cost me $8,000 to play a sport.
Yeah.
Cause I'm,
$300 to buy the uniform.
yeah.
Okay, now, as I also know that there's significant concern about young males. But something about who applied to UVM last year and the proportions.
Yeah, it's been arguments.
I know at VSAC that's been a discussion. No, that's
Are not going.
beyond the scope of this committee. I'm just
Go ahead.
gonna deal with that.
Or store the workforce, make good money.
Yeah. But what's really good money at 20,
I know. I know.
when you're 35,
You're 20 bucks, when you're
Oh, I
16,
know.
20 bucks an hour, it's pretty good.
used to make
When you're-
50 cents.
When they're living at home and not paying your bills.
That's right.
It's pretty good. I started,
And you're on your parents' health insurance.
that's right, all of it.
I missed those things.
Yeah. Now you can get out. Wow. Okay, I think that's it